What's happening, everybody? It's going to start something brand new with you. I say brand new, but basically it's probably something you've heard or that I've done before, but now I'm going to put this in a video series. So basically what's going to be happening here is I want to go through the story of David. I love David. I love him being the man after God's own heart, and looking through his past, looking through where he started and where God took him and the journey in between is so awesome and so powerful, and really depicts this Old Testament warrior, this follower of God that served many years ago before Jesus died on the cross and everything, and how he just fought after fight, not just physical enemies, but just continually fighting for God and what God was trying to give his people. So I want to dive into that. I want to explore that. I've done this series or series like this in person, in youth, but I want to put this in a video format so it can be on YouTube, it can be online, and you can go back to it anytime, pick it up. It's just an awesome story to tell, an awesome story to hear, to learn about. So with that being said, let's dive in. So where I want to start with this is not the conventional place. I want to give a little bit of context leading up to David. So I'm actually going to talk about starting with God's people, Israel. I'm going to start with them and the need that they felt they had to have a king. And what I say by that is starting in 1 Samuel chapter 8, we see where God's people has gone through a lot already up to this point. We're in 1 Samuel, so we've read about creation. You've read all about the captivity of God's people for 400-something years and how Moses delivered them, right? And from that point on, they're continuing going on with the promised land and finding all this stuff. But what they're doing is they are having basically God guide them. God is utilizing specific people, followers of his, to help distribute this leadership to his people. So God blesses and equips certain people to help lead his people. That's the kind of the way it's been going. All these different prophets, all these great people, from Moses to Aaron, all these people, Joshua, they are anointed by God to help lead his people. And that has been phenomenal. That has worked. But now what is happening, we're coming to this point, Israel is now getting in this point in their history, in their life of being established, and they want a king. They want an earthly king, somebody here in flesh and blood that will go fight for them. Go fight off the enemy. This is the mentality they have. And I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to dive into what this is saying. But just looking at 1 Samuel chapter 8, starting with verse 1, it says, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. So judges, are people that are appointed to kind of help maintain balance, help maintain the peace, help guide people. So Samuel anointed his sons to be judges for Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, accepted bribes, and perverted justice. So, first of all, imagine here is Samuel, who is this great prophet of God, who has helped guide them and been God's voice and hands and feet upon the earth. And here he is, and he has these sons. He's appointing his sons, thinking the sons are going to follow in his footsteps, but not quite so, right? So basically, they get appointed these positions, but then they didn't walk in the ways that Samuel did. They turned aside after going after these dishonest gains and accepting bribes and this perverted type of justice. The power was going to their head. They're walking their own path now. And so all of the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old." Hey, hopefully they didn't say it that way. Go up to, "Hey, Samuel, you're old. And your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." Ouch, right? I mean, if you're Samuel, here comes the elders of your people. The elders are coming to you, and they're saying, "Hey, Samuel, you're old." So basically, Samuel's getting older. He's not going to be with him forever. And there's no good-looking prospects for who's going to take up after you get too old to do this. Because they refer to your sons aren't you. They're not walking in your ways. They're not following in your footsteps. We don't really want them to guide us. And so here's their alternative. They say, "Give us a king to lead us like all the other nations around us." So they're looking at all these other nations, and they want a king like they have. And, for me, in looking at this is the people, they look at the situation, and they're making a decisions themselves. So they see the situation, all logical, right? Samuel's getting old. He's not going to lead them forever. The next plausible thing would be his sons to carry on in his footsteps, but they aren't right with God. They're not following his ways. So no, we don't want them. So, but hey, look at all these other nations around us. They have men, kings, to lead them. Let's have what they have. So they see the situation and they're making a decision upon themselves. And it's almost like they're not trusting in God the way they have for many, many years beforehand. Instead, they want to, here's what I think we need to have, not really trusting in God. And then, of course, with all that, here's Samuel getting that rejection, right? So when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do." So backing up here, first verse 6, they said, "Give us a king to lead us." Obviously, this displeased Samuel, so he went to God. He did the thing that you're supposed to do. Gets upset, he gets frustrated, didn't know what's going on, and he seeks God. He turns to him. And so here's what God told him. He said, "Listen to the people," right? Listen to them, but hey, tell them what to expect, right? So the people wanted a king like all the other nations around them. And to me, this sometimes I think we need something we don't, right? The people, they think they need something, but they really don't need that. I don't know how many times even in my life, and you could probably think the same thing, that you are making a good decision. You think, "Oh man, this is something that I need. This is something that needs to happen, or something I need to do." And all your facts, everything you've done points to that. And so you feel good about it. Oh, okay. Same way God's people. They're looking at the situation. Samuel's old. Sons aren't going to take his place. All the other nations have kings. And then, all good, valid points. Let's make a decision. But that's just because all those things are there doesn't mean that that's what needs to happen. And I think we all fall, prey to that sometimes. Sometimes we think we need something when we don't. And we tend to go out and do that or seize that and not really trusting in God. Because God has taken care of them up until this point. Many of them don't realize it. Many of them aren't recognizing it. But he has. We can read back in scriptures and see where God has really blessed and taken care of them. God even tells Samuel himself, "I've done this since the day I brought them out of Egypt," right? So he's been with them every step of the way. So even though Samuel's old and his sons aren't following his footsteps, God's still in control. God will raise up somebody else to take Samuel's place. Or whatever the situation. Maybe he'll change the heart of his sons. Who knows? But the people aren't waiting for that. The people aren't turning to that way. Instead, they're making a decision based upon what they think they need, when really they don't. And so, God is, he's having this conversation with Samuel, and he says, first of all, it's not you that they've rejected. And I think that's so awesome to point out that God's doing. God is pointing out to Samuel, hey, first of all, it's not you they're rejecting. So really don't take it personal. It still, may sting a little bit. Samuel still may feel that sting a little bit. But God is saying it's not you they've rejected, it's me. Because they have rejected me since the day I brought them out of Egypt. Since the day I rescued them from 400 plus years of slavery, they're still rejecting me. And that's crazy to fathom, but it's true. And so that's what God's pointing out to him. He's pointing out that they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Because now they're wanting a human, flesh and blood man to make decisions for them, to rule over them, instead of it being God, right? So they're rejecting God, not necessarily Samuel. And even though they may not be intentionally trying to do that, but that's just what's happening. So he says, now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do. So he says, okay, just be clear, paint the picture. This is what this king's going to do when he's reigning over you. Make sure they're aware of that. So verse 10, Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive gardens and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your manservants and maidservants are the best of your cattle, and the best of your cattle. The donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. So he's painting this, he's laying it out for him, just like God instructed him to do. He's laying it out for him. This is what's going to happen. The king that you want, he's going to come, he's going to claim all these things because this is what the other nations are doing. The other nations that you're comparing yourself to, of them having a king, well, this is what's happening to them. Do you want the king to come and take a tenth of the best of your flock, a tenth of your land? Do you want the king to come take your sons and daughters and put them into different positions and serve different ways? Do you really want all this stuff? It's kind of how it sounds, right? But he's being very clear. And I think that it's something that we lack again today. Sometimes we're not clear in painting a picture for other people. But if you look at this, Samuel is warning the people what the king's going to happen, and sometimes we never know or believe the consequences of our choices or our decisions. Sometimes we never really know the consequences, or we refuse to believe what the consequences could be of our decisions. So all these people are hearing this, and this is what it says, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. So they're not understanding the consequences. Apparently, they're thinking none of that is matters. None of that's going to be of consequence. That's okay. We're okay. What we want is a king to go out, to lead us, go out before us, and fight our battles. And great. Okay. Can't really fault you for that. Can't really be upset with that. But look at this, is that they don't know the consequences of what they're asking. And then, to me, I'm looking at this, and they want somebody else to go fight the battles for them. They kind of want to get lazy. They want somebody else to go out and do that. But once again, how the king is going to do that is by taking your sons and daughters, by taking your land, by taking half your property in order to be able to make that happen. See, you're sacrificing a lot more than you think to gain what you want. And the people aren't seeing that. The people aren't realizing it or recognizing that. And that is what is so what's so hard to watch this happening. So you know, coming from Samuel's perspective, this is hard, right? He started out kind of feeling a little rejected, kind of feeling a little bit upset. You know, God kind of put him at ease a little bit, but, you know, things still there. And now he's seeing these people making this decision based upon what other nations are doing or based upon what they think they need. And they're not recognizing the consequences of that decision or the possible consequences of it. And you know, and it was never all bad. I mean, God is allowing this to happen, right? God is allowing this to happen. He says, let them have their king, but just remind them, warn them what this king is going to require of them. So when Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. Then Samuel said to the men of Israel, everyone go back to his town. So, you know, right off the bat here, so we're seeing where Israel's calling out for a king. Why? You know, all these different reasonings are there, but none of them is anything near what God wants for his people. None of them is, well, we feel this is what God wants us to do. None of them is that. It's all based upon things that they're reading the situation themselves. They're saying Samuel becoming old, his sons aren't capable to lead. We want to be like all these other nations, and we want this king to fight for us, to go out in front of us, to lead us, to rally us, someone we can stand behind to go fight our battles for us. And that's what they want. I think too oftentimes we fall into that. We fall into all those same things as well. We think we know what we need, but we really don't need that. We don't really weigh out and even know or believe, and this can be the possible consequences, even though it's laid out to us. And then, you know, once again, even from Samuel's perspective, man, he got rejected. Enough said, right? But it's even more so than that. It's not about Samuel being rejected, it's about God being rejected. And sometimes when we are making those decisions upon ourselves, we are rejecting God, or we could possibly be rejecting God. And so we gotta watch that. We gotta be careful of that, is that we are making these decisions. We are going about our life and trying to do these things, but making sure we're turned to God first. Because sometimes denying something or refusing something or whatever, we could be defying God. We're rejecting him. Maybe we think we're rejecting this person or this idea, but no, we're rejecting God. And so this is setting up, right? I'm preparing the launch pad here before we actually get into the warrior King David. But this is what it is. This is how it's happening, is that the people are wanting a king. God is going to answer them by saying, give them a king. And as I get into it next, of course, we get introduced to Saul, and we see that God has chosen this man to be the king. And so even though this is what the people wanting, and God is kind of feeling, well, the people rejecting me, I'm still going to look out for them. And he does right by them. He gives them the best man possible for the job, according to what they're seeking. And so we'll get into more of that later. So this is where, this is why I want to do this, is because I want to break this down however much we can to go through this and really deep dive into David and what God did, how God used him, and the heart and mentality that he gained that allowed him to be such an influential person in our history, good and the bad, right? And hopefully to cover a little bit more than just Goliath, a little bit more than just all the main points that we know, the stories that we know of David. But there's so much more into it and about him that really we need to take into ourselves about how we can become this fighter for what we're fighting for. Because we're in a battle every day. We're in a struggle against sin. We're in a struggle against the devil. We're struggling every day, right? We need to keep fighting. And not only do we see David fighting, people, physical people, but these are also enemies of God. This is also sin. This is also the enemy trying to attack God and his people. And we see David combat that, both physically and spiritually. And so it's awesome. I hope you get something out of this, and stay tuned as we continue on this multi-part series of David, this warrior king. Until next time, guys, I'll catch you later.